The morning of June 15th started like any other Tuesday in the quiet residential neighborhood of Maple Street, Denver, Colorado. The sun painted golden streaks across the freshly cut lawns, and a gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of blooming roses from Mrs. Henderson's prized garden. Children's laughter echoed from various backyards as summer vacation had officially begun, filling the air with that carefree joy that only comes with endless days of freedom ahead. 3-year-old Emma Martinez was the picture of innocent happiness as she chased iridescent soap bubbles in her grandmother Rose's front yard. Her tiny hands reached skyward, trying to catch the floating spheres that danced just beyond her grasp. Emma's dark pigtails bounced with each enthusiastic jump, secured with bright pink ribbons that matched her favorite polka-dot sundress, one with tiny butterflies embroidered along the hem that she had insisted on wearing that morning, despite her mother's suggestion of play clothes. "Mira, abuela, look!" Emma called out in her sweet mixture of Spanish and English, pointing excitedly at a particularly large bubble that shimmered with rainbow colors. Rosa Martínez Valdez, Emma's 67-year-old grandmother, smiled warmly from Valerie. Her position on the front porch, where she was tending to her collection of potted geraniums. Rosa had been babysitting Emma every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 6 months while Emma's parents, Carlos and Isabella, worked their demanding jobs at the downtown medical center. "Que hermoso, mi amor," Rosa called back, her weathered hands gently watering the bright red flowers that reminded her of her childhood home in Guadalajara. She watched her granddaughter with the pure adoration that only grandparents possess, every giggle a treasure, every stumbling step a miracle, worth celebrating. Emma had just discovered that if she blew very gently on the bubbles, instead of trying to catch them, they would float higher and last longer before popping. Her concentrated expression was adorable as she pursed her tiny lips and exhaled with the seriousness of a scientist conducting an important experiment. The morning sun caught her brown eyes, making them sparkle with wonder at this simple magic of childhood. 3 miles across town, Officer Jake Harrison was having a very different kind of morning. At 34, Harrison was a 7-year veteran of the Denver Police Department, known for his methodical approach and unwavering dedication to protocol. He had been partnered with Rex, a 4-year-old German Shepherd, for nearly 2 years, and they had developed what he believed was an unbreakable bond built on mutual respect and countless hours of training. But something was off about Rex today. The 85-pound dog had been restless since dawn, pacing in his kennel at the station with an unusual intensity that had Harrison concerned. Rex's normally pristine appetite had vanished. He had turned away from his favorite morning treats, leaving them untouched in his bowl. His ears kept twitching at sounds only he could hear, and his normally steady breathing seemed labored and anxious. "What's got you wound up, boy?" Harrison asked, running his hand along Rex's muscled back as they prepared for their patrol shift. Rex's fur felt slightly damp with perspiration, and his body temperature seemed elevated. The dog's dark eyes darted constantly, never settling on any one thing for more than a second. Harrison made a mental note to schedule a vet visit if Rex's behavior didn't improve, but their duty roster was packed with back-to-back calls, and the department had been short-staffed for weeks. Rex had been panting excessively during roll call, his tongue lolling out as he shifted restlessly beside Harrison's chair. Sergeant Bradley had noticed the dog's agitation, but attributed it to the unusual heat wave that had settled over Denver, pushing temperatures into the mid-90s by 9 a.m. What none of them knew was that Rex had been secretly struggling with severe anxiety for months, a condition that would have immediately disqualified him from active duty if properly diagnosed. As Harrison loaded Rex into the specially modified patrol car with its climate-controlled rear compartment and reinforced barriers, he tried to calm his partner with soothing words. "Easy there, Rex. Just another day keeping the streets safe. Right?" But Rex's agitation only seemed to increase as they pulled out of the station parking lot. The dog's whining grew more pronounced, a high-pitched sound that Harrison had never heard before in their partnership. The radio crackled to life at 10:47 a.m. with a domestic disturbance call at 1247 Maple Street, just 2 houses down from where Emma was creating her bubble masterpiece. Unit 47. Respond to possible domestic violence situation. Neighbor reports. Shouting and possible property damage. Suspect may still be on scene. Harrison acknowledged the call and felt Rex tense immediately at the sound of the radio's static. The dog's body went rigid, his ears standing at full attention as if he sensed something beyond human perception. "Looks like we've got work to do, partner," Harrison said, flipping on the patrol car's emergency lights as they navigated through the tree-lined streets toward Maple Street. What Harrison couldn't have known was that Rex's heightened state wasn't due to eagerness or professional instinct. The dog had been experiencing increasingly frequent episodes of sensory overload, triggered by a combination of inadequate socialization during his puppyhood and the cumulative stress of his high-pressure job. Rex's world had become a constant assault of overwhelming sounds, scents, and stimuli that his nervous system could no longer process normally. As they approached Maple Street, Rex's behavior escalated dramatically. The dog began scratching frantically at the car's interior, leaving deep gouges in the reinforced plastic barriers. His breathing became rapid and shallow, and a thin line of saliva dripped from his muzzle, signs that any experienced animal behaviorist would have recognized as severe distress, but which Harrison interpreted as Rex's eagerness to work. Emma, meanwhile, had discovered a new game. She had found that, by spinning in circles before chasing the bubbles, she could make herself delightfully dizzy, causing the floating spheres to appear to dance in magical patterns around her. Her infectious giggles drew smiles from neighbors, walking their dogs and joggers passing by on their morning routes. Mrs. Chun from across the street waved from her garden, and Emma responded with an enthusiastic wave that nearly sent her tumbling onto the soft grass. The peaceful morning scene was about to be shattered by the convergence of two worlds: traumatized police dog struggling with undiagnosed psychological issues, and an innocent child whose only concern was whether the next bubble would be big enough to see her reflection in its surface. Neither Emma nor her grandmother had any reason to fear the approaching police car, its emergency lights flashing as it turned onto their quiet street. Rex could smell Emma's presence even before the patrol car came to a stop in front of 1245 Maple Street. The child's scent, mixed with the sweet soap solution and the various neighborhood aromas, created a sensory cocktail that triggered something deep and primal in Rex's damaged psyche. His claws scraped against the car floor as he pressed his face against the window, his dark eyes fixed on the small figure dancing among the bubbles just 50 yards away. Harrison parked the patrol car and reached for Rex's lead, completely unaware that he was about to release a 85-pound weapon whose training and instincts had been compromised by months of unaddressed psychological trauma. Emma continued her innocent play, her small voice singing a nonsense song she had made up about flying bubbles and dancing flowers, oblivious to the fact that her carefree childhood was about to end in the most traumatic way possible. The stage was set for a tragedy that would expose systemic failures in police dog training, cover-ups that prioritized budgets over safety, and ultimately lead to a courtroom confrontation where a 3-year-old's simple words would deliver justice more powerfully than any lawyer's argument. But in this moment, there were only bubbles floating in the morning sunshine, and a little girl who believed the world was nothing but wonder and magic. The clock on the church tower at the end of Maple Street chimed 11 times, marking the exact moment when everything would change forever. The suspect had vanished by the time Officer Harrison's patrol car rolled to a stop in front of 1245 Maple Street. The house stood eerily quiet, its front door hanging slightly ajar, screen door swaying gently in the morning breeze. Broken glass. From what appeared to be a thrown beer bottle sparkled on the concrete driveway, and the neighbors who had called in the domestic disturbance were nowhere to be seen, likely retreating indoors once they spotted the police. Cars flashing lights. Harrison stepped out of the vehicle, his trained eyes quickly scanning the scene for signs of the perpetrator or any remaining danger. The silence was almost unsettling after the urgency of the radio call. He could hear the distant hum of a lawnmower 3 blocks away and the cheerful sound of children playing, but the house in front of him seemed frozen in the aftermath of whatever violence had occurred inside. In the back of the patrol car, Rex was beyond agitation now. The German shepherd's massive frame trembled with barely contained energy, his dark eyes wild and unfocused. Thick ropes of saliva hung from his jowls as he panted rapidly, his breathing so labored it fogged the reinforced windows of his compartment. The dog's claws had left deep scratches in the car's interior, evidence of his frantic attempts to escape the confined space that had become a prison of overwhelming sensory input. What Harrison didn't realize was that Rex's highly sensitive nose had detected a cocktail of scents that were triggering a cascading psychological breakdown. The lingering smell of alcohol and domestic violence from the target house mixed with the sweet bubble solution from Emma's yard, creating a sensory overload that Rex's damaged nervous system couldn't process. To the dog's confused mind, every scent represented a potential threat that needed to be neutralized immediately. Harrison opened Rex's compartment door, expecting his partner to exit with the controlled discipline they had practiced thousands of times during training exercises. Instead, Rex burst out like a caged animal, his 85 pounds of muscle and fury barely contained by the standard police leash. The dog's body language screamed aggression, his hackles raised, ears pinned back, and his usually confident gait replaced by a predatory crouch that any animal behaviorist would have recognized as dangerous. "Easy, Rex. Easy, boy," Harrison commanded, but his voice seemed to have no effect on the dog's escalating anxiety. Rex's head swiveled constantly, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow, his nostrils flaring as he processed scents that existed only in his traumatized perception. The dog pulled so hard against his leash that Harrison had to brace his legs. To maintain control, the reinforced nylon straining under the force of Rex's desperation to break free. 50 yards away, Emma Martinez continued her innocent play, completely oblivious to the psychological storm brewing in the police dog's mind. She had discovered that by running in small circles, she could create a tiny whirlwind that would catch the soap bubbles and send them dancing in spirals around her. Her delighted giggles carried on the morning air as she spun faster and faster, her pink polka dot dress twirling around her like a flower blooming in the sunshine. Grandmother Rosa looked up from her geraniums, sensing something different in the atmosphere, but unable to identify the source of her unease. She noticed the police car parked down the street and said a small prayer for whatever family was experiencing trouble, grateful that her own peaceful morning with Emma remained undisturbed. If only she had known that danger was measured not in distance, but in the deteriorating mental state of a police dog whose training had failed to address his fundamental psychological instability. Harrison began his approach toward the silent house, following standard protocol for domestic disturbance calls. Rex should have been walking calmly at his side, nose to the ground, professionally scanning for evidence or signs of the suspect's escape route. Instead, the dog strained constantly toward Emma's yard, his attention completely fixated on the small figure dancing among the bubbles. Every few seconds, Rex would emit a low growl that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest, a sound that Harrison had never heard before in their 2 years of partnership. A security camera mounted on the corner of the Hendersons' house at 1249 Maple Street had been installed just 3 weeks earlier after a series of package thefts in the neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson had chosen the most advanced model available, capable of recording in high definition with crystal clear audio. She had positioned it to capture her front porch and driveway, but its wide-angle lens also covered a significant portion of the Martinez front yard where Emma was playing. This technological eye would soon become the most important witness to a tragedy that would shake the foundations of police accountability across the nation. As Harrison approached the target house's front steps, Rex's behavior reached a critical breaking point. The dog's breathing became so rapid it was almost hyperventilation, and his eyes had dilated to the point where only thin rings of brown iris remained visible around the expanded black pupils. Rex's entire muscular frame trembled with the effort of containing whatever psychological demons were driving his increasing aggression. The breaking point came when Emma's bubble solution ran out, and she skipped closer to the property line to retrieve the backup bottle her grandmother had left near the fence. This brought her within 30 yards of Rex's position, and the proximity seemed to flip a switch in the dog's traumatized mind. Rex's training had conditioned him to pursue and neutralize threats, but his psychological damage had corrupted his ability to distinguish between actual dangers and innocent children at play. Harrison felt the leash go slack in his hands and looked down in confusion. For one terrifying moment, he didn't understand what was happening. Rex had somehow slipped his collar, something that should have been impossible with the reinforced equipment they used. Later investigation would reveal that Rex had been systematically loosening his collar for weeks, a self-destructive behavior that animal psychologists would identify as a symptom of severe anxiety and confinement stress. "Rex, stay!" Harrison shouted, but his voice was lost in the morning air as the German Shepherd exploded into motion with the focused intensity of a guided missile. Rex's powerful legs propelled him across the distance between the houses in seconds, his massive frame moving with the terrifying grace of a predator who had finally identified his target. Emma heard the sound of rapidly approaching paws on concrete, and turned with the innocent curiosity of a child who had never learned to fear. Her brown eyes widened as she saw the large dog racing directly toward her, but her 3-year-old mind couldn't process the danger quickly enough to react. She simply stood there, bubble wand still clutched in her tiny hand, watching in fascination as this magnificent animal approached her at full speed. The collision was devastating. Rex's 85 pounds of muscle struck Emma with the force of a small automobile, sending her tiny body flying backward onto the grass. The bubble solution scattered in a wide arc, creating an almost surreal rainbow mist. In the morning sunlight, as Emma's terrified scream pierced the peaceful suburban air, Rosa dropped her watering can and ran toward her granddaughter, her 67-year-old legs moving faster than they had in years, powered by the primal terror of watching her beloved child under attack. Her own screams joined Emma's, creating a symphony of horror that would haunt the neighbors' nightmares for months to come. Rex's jaws clamped down on Emma's small arm with the crushing force of a steel trap. The dog's training had taught him to bite and hold, never to release until commanded by his handler. But Rex's psychological breakdown meant that Harrison's desperate commands fell on deaf ears. The German Shepherd shook his head violently, the way his ancestors had killed prey in the wild, completely disconnected from the reality that he was savaging an innocent child. The security camera captured every horrifying second in crystal clear detail. Emma's pink dress darkening with blood, Rosa's desperate attempts to pull her granddaughter to safety, Harrison's panicked sprint across the yard, and Rex's unmistakable aggressive body language that would later prove this was no accident or case of mistaken identity, but rather the systematic failure of a police department that had ignored every warning sign of a dangerous animal in their ranks. The attack lasted only 17 seconds according to the timestamp on the security footage, but those 17 seconds would change everything for Emma, who would carry physical and emotional scars for the rest of her life. For Harrison, who would discover that his trusted partner was a ticking time bomb. And for a police department whose negligence was about to be exposed on a national stage. The antiseptic smell of Denver General Hospital's pediatric ICU was overwhelming as Emma Martinez fought for her life in Operating Room 3. Dr. Sarachan, the hospital's top pediatric surgeon, worked methodically to repair the extensive damage to Emma's small arm, her skilled hands reconstructing torn muscle tissue and severed tendons that Rex's powerful jaws had mangled beyond recognition. The surgery, originally estimated to take 2 hours, had stretched into its 4th hour as the medical team discovered the true extent of Emma's injuries. Nerve damage that might never fully heal, and bone fragments that had to be painstakingly reassembled like a 3-dimensional puzzle. While Emma's fate hung in the balance, investigative journalist Maria Santos was pursuing a very different kind of surgery dissecting the Denver Police Department's carefully constructed narrative about Rex's exemplary service record. Santos, a 34-year-old former police reporter who had built her career exposing institutional cover-ups, had been monitoring emergency scanner traffic when the attack occurred. Something about the department's immediate response had triggered her investigative instincts, the way they had quickly cordoned off the scene, the unusual number of supervisors who had arrived within minutes, and most tellingly, the immediate assignment of Media Relations Officer Lieutenant Patricia Walsh to manage the narrative before the facts had even been established. Santos began her investigation with a simple Colorado Open Records Act request for Rex's training files, medical records, and incident reports. What she received 3 days later was a suspiciously thin folder containing glowing evaluations, perfect health records, and absolutely no documentation of behavioral problems. The file portrayed Rex as a model police dog, intelligent, obedient, and completely stable. But Santos had been investigating police misconduct long enough to recognize the telltale signs of sanitized records. The documents were too perfect, too clean, and notably lacking the kind of minor incidents and training notes that typically filled genuine canine files. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a veterinary behaviorist who contracted with multiple Colorado law enforcement agencies, had been following the news coverage of Emma's attack with growing horror and guilt. Dr. Walsh knew Rex intimately. She had evaluated him 6 months earlier after a concerning incident during a routine school demonstration where the dog had lunged at a group of kindergartners before being pulled back by his handler. Her confidential report had recommended Rex's immediate removal from active duty and comprehensive psychological evaluation. Dr. Walsh's hands trembled as she retrieved the copy of her report from her personal files. The document, stamped confidential immediate. Action required, detailed Rex's concerning behavioral patterns in clinical language that left no room for misinterpretation. Subject exhibits signs of severe anxiety, hypervigilance, and inappropriate aggressive responses to benign stimuli, she had written. Recommend immediate suspension from duty pending comprehensive behavioral modification therapy. Subject poses significant liability risk in current operational capacity. The report had been submitted directly to Sergeant Tom Bradley, the K-9 unit supervisor, along with formal recommendations for Rex's retirement. Dr. Walsh had followed up twice with phone calls, expressing her serious concerns about public safety. Bradley had assured her that her recommendations were being carefully considered, and that Rex would be monitored closely. What Dr. Walsh didn't know was that Bradley had buried her report in his desk drawer, terrified that acknowledging Rex's problems would reflect poorly on his management of the K-9 program and potentially derail his upcoming promotion to lieutenant. Santos' investigation deepened when she discovered that Dr. Walsh wasn't the only professional who had raised red flags about Rex. Officer Michelle Roberts, a decorated K-9 trainer with 15 years of experience, had submitted 3 separate incident reports documenting Rex's unpredictable behavior during training exercises. In one incident, Rex had attacked a training dummy with such ferocity that he had torn through the reinforced materials and continued attacking the metal frame underneath. In another, he had refused to release his bite on a practice target despite repeated commands from multiple handlers. The most disturbing incident occurred during a joint training exercise with the Denver Fire Department. Rex had somehow broken free from his restraints and chased a firefighter up a ladder truck, forcing the man to seek refuge 20 feet off the ground, while Rex circled below like a predator waiting for prey to fall. Officer Roberts had documented the incident meticulously, noting that Rex showed no response to verbal commands and had to be physically subdued by 3 officers, using a catch-pole equipment typically reserved for feral animals. Roberts' reports had been submitted through proper channels, but like Dr. Walsh's evaluation, they had mysteriously disappeared from Rex's official file. When Santos finally tracked down Officer Roberts, who had transferred to a different precinct, the trainer broke down in tears. "I knew this would happen," Robert sobbed over coffee at a downtown diner. "I told them that dog was a ticking time bomb." Bradley said I was being overly cautious and that my reports were unnecessarily alarmist. He made it clear that my concerns weren't welcome. The pattern of willful blindness extended to Rex's medical history as well. Santos discovered that the department's veterinarian, Dr. Marcus Thompson, had prescribed trazodone, a powerful anti-anxiety medication for Rex after the dog had suffered what appeared to be panic attacks during routine vehicle maintenance. The medication, which can cause drowsiness and confusion in some animals, had been administered secretly to avoid the paperwork and oversight that would have triggered if Rex's anxiety issues had been officially documented. Even more shocking was Santos' discovery that Rex had failed his initial psychological evaluation when he first entered the police canine program. The evaluating psychologist, Dr. Amanda Foster, had noted significant anxiety markers and inappropriate aggression responses that should have disqualified Rex from service. However, the Denver Police Department had invested nearly $15,000 in Rex's initial training, and with budget constraints limiting their ability to acquire new dogs, Sergeant Bradley had pressured Dr. Foster to give Rex another chance with additional socialization training. Dr. Foster's original evaluation, buried deep in the department's archives, painted a disturbing picture of an animal wholly unsuited for police work. Subject displays classic signs of inadequate early socialization. Her report stated, "Recommended course of action: return to breeder for appropriate placement as companion animal in controlled environment. Subject should not be deployed in high-stress public safety scenarios." The web of negligence extended even higher up the chain of command. Santos discovered that Police Chief Robert Hayes had been briefed about concerns regarding the canine program during his monthly supervisory meetings, but had chosen to prioritize budget considerations over public safety. Internal memos revealed that the department was under pressure to maintain their canine units despite funding cuts, and replacing problematic dogs like Rex would have required expenditures that the chief deemed fiscally irresponsible. Perhaps most damning was Santos' discovery of the department's internal incident tracking system, a confidential database that recorded every complaint, concern, or unusual occurrence involving police animals. Rex's entry in this system told a story completely different from his sanitized official file. Over the past 18 months, Rex had been involved in 7 separate incidents that should have triggered immediate intervention: biting a postal worker who was delivering mail to the police station, attacking a therapy dog during a community outreach event, lunging at a television news crew during a routine interview, showing food aggression that injured a fellow canine, destroying property at a veterinary clinic during a routine checkup, exhibiting predatory behavior toward children at a school demonstration, and most recently, requiring sedation during a simple grooming session. Each incident had been downplayed, rationalized, or simply ignored by supervisors who viewed Rex as a valuable asset too expensive to replace. The pattern was clear. The Denver Police Department had knowingly deployed a psychologically unstable animal in situations where public safety was at risk, prioritizing their budget and reputation over the welfare of innocent citizens like Emma Martinez. As Santos compiled her evidence, she realized she wasn't just investigating a single dog attack. She was exposing a systematic failure of oversight, accountability, and basic professional responsibility that had turned law enforcement tool into a weapon of mass destruction. Rex's attack on Emma wasn't an unfortunate accident. It was the inevitable result of institutional negligence that had ignored every possible warning sign in favor of protecting careers and budgets. The truth was finally emerging from the shadows, and it would soon explode across newspaper headlines and television screens nationwide, transforming Emma's tragedy into a catalyst for fundamental reform in how police departments nationwide managed their K-9 programs. The secrets were no longer safe in their files. The pediatric ICU waiting room at Denver General Hospital had become a second home for the Martinez family over the past week. Carlos Martinez sat hunched forward in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his calloused hands clasped tightly together, as he stared at the industrial carpet beneath his feet. At 29, Carlos had worked construction since he was 16, building his life one honest day's work at a time, but no amount of physical labor had prepared him for the emotional weight of watching his 3-year-old daughter fight for her future in the room just beyond the double doors marked authorized personnel only. Isabella Martinez paced the small waiting area like a caged animal, her nursing scrubs wrinkled from sleeping in hospital chairs for 7 consecutive nights. As a pediatric nurse at Denver Children's Hospital, Isabella had comforted hundreds of families through their darkest hours, but being on the other side of tragedy had shattered her professional composure. Every few minutes, she would pause at the large window overlooking the city and press her forehead against the cool glass, trying to steady her breathing and push away the intrusive images of Rex's jaws, clamped around her daughter's tiny arm. Emma's condition had stabilized after the initial emergency surgery, but the road ahead stretched endlessly before them. Dr. Sarah Chun had been brutally honest during their last consultation. Emma would need a minimum of 4 additional surgeries over the next 2 years, followed by intensive physical therapy that might restore 60% of her arm's functionality if everything went perfectly. The nerve damage was extensive, and there was a real possibility that Emma would never regain full use of her dominant hand. For a little girl who loved to draw butterflies and write her name in crayon, the prognosis was devastating. The medical bills were already mounting to astronomical levels. Even with Carlos's construction company insurance and Isabella's hospital benefits, they were looking at out-of-pocket expenses exceeding $200,000. The family's modest savings money they had been setting aside for Emma's college education had been depleted in the first week. Carlos had already missed 2 weeks of work, and his foreman had been understanding but clear. The construction schedule wouldn't wait indefinitely for his return. It was during this darkest hour that 2 very different angels appeared in the scenes. Martinez family's life, each offering salvation that came with a price that would test their fundamental beliefs about justice and truth. The first angel arrived in the form of David Chun, a nationally renowned civil rights attorney who had built his career fighting police misconduct cases across the country. Chun was a slight man with graying temples and intense dark eyes that missed nothing, dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than Carlos made in a month. He had driven straight from the airport after seeing the security footage on CNN, his legal instincts immediately recognizing the case as a potential landmark victory for police accountability. Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, Chun said softly as he took a seat across from them in the hospital cafeteria. I want to help you get justice for Emma. He spread a folder of newspaper clippings across the small table headlines from major newspapers across the country covering Emma's story. This case has already captured national attention. We have security footage that clearly shows the attack was unprovoked. We have evidence of the police department's negligence in training and supervision. And most importantly, we have a jury pool that will see your beautiful daughter and understand that this should never have happened. Chun outlined his strategy with the precision of a master craftsman describing his trade. He would file a federal civil rights lawsuit under Section 1983, alleging that the Denver Police Department had violated Emma's constitutional rights by deploying a dangerous weapon Rex without proper safeguards. The evidence have covered up incident reports and ignored professional recommendations would paint a picture of systematic negligence that juries found compelling. Similar cases had resulted in settlements ranging from $2 to $15 million. I won't charge you a penny unless we win, Chun assured them, pulling out a standard contingency fee agreement. I'll cover all court costs, expert witness fees, investigation expenses, everything. If we lose, you owe me nothing. If we win, I take 1/3 of the settlement or jury award. Your daughter's future will be financially secure, and the Denver Police Department will be forced to reform their K-9 program so this never happens to another child. The second angel appeared just hours after Chun's departure, wearing the uniform and badge of the Denver Police Department. Chief Robert Hayes was an imposing figure 6 feet tall with steel gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. He had served the department for 28 years, rising through the ranks with a reputation for integrity and community engagement. His presence in the hospital waiting room, flanked by 2 plainclothes detectives, immediately drew the attention of other families and hospital staff. Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, Chief Hayes said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. I came here personally to apologize for what happened to Emma and to discuss how we can make this right. He gestured to the detectives, who positioned themselves strategically to ensure privacy. What happened to your daughter was a tragedy, and I take full responsibility as the leader of this department. Hayes painted a very different picture than Chun had presented. He spoke of Rex as a decorated police dog with an exemplary service record who had suffered an unprecedented psychological breakdown that no one could have predicted. He emphasized that Officer Harrison was devastated by the incident and that the entire K-9 program was undergoing comprehensive review. Most importantly, he offered an immediate solution to their financial crisis. The city is prepared to offer a settlement that will cover all of Emma's medical expenses, current and future, plus additional compensation for her pain and suffering, Hayes explained, sliding a leather portfolio across the table. We're talking about a significant sum, available immediately, with no legal fees or court costs. Emma can begin her rehabilitation right away without the family worrying about money. The offer was staggering. $1.2 million in immediate cash, plus a guaranteed medical trust fund that would cover all of Emma's future surgeries, therapy, and adaptive equipment for the rest of her life. The only requirement was that the family sign a comprehensive, non-disclosure agreement that would prevent them from discussing the case with media, filing any lawsuits, or cooperating with external investigations. I understand this is difficult, Hayes continued, his voice taking on an almost fatherly tone. But consider Emma's best interests. A lengthy court battle will force her to relive this trauma over and over again. She'd be subjected to depositions, medical examinations by defense attorneys, and ultimately may have to testify about the most frightening experience of her young life. The stress could seriously impact her psychological recovery. Hayes leaned forward, his eyes meeting Carlos's directly. "I have grandchildren Emma's age, Mr. Martinez. If this had happened to one of them, I would want the nightmare to end as quickly as possible, so they could heal and move forward with their lives. This settlement allows Emma to get the best medical care money can buy, while protecting her from years of legal proceedings that will keep this tragedy alive in her memory." The chief left them with 48 hours to consider the offer, warning that if they chose to pursue litigation, the city would have no choice but to vigorously defend against any claims, potentially tying up the case in court for years while Emma's medical needs continued to mount. Isabella sat staring at the two documents spread across the hospital room's small table. Chun's contingency fee agreement, promising justice and accountability, and Hayes's settlement offer promising immediate financial security and privacy. Both men had spoken convincingly about what was best for Emma, but their visions of her future couldn't have been more different. Carlos broke the silence first. "Me, Amor, what kind of parents would we be if we let them buy our silence? What about the next Emma Martinez? What about the next family who doesn't have security cameras to prove what really happened?" His voice trembled with emotion as he continued. "This isn't just about money. It's about making sure this never happens again." Isabella understood her husband's moral certainty, but she also saw the practical reality of their situation. What if we lose Carlos? What if the jury decides it was just a terrible accident? Emma will still need those surgeries, and we'll have nothing. We'll lose our house, our savings, everything. Is our pride worth risking our daughter's future? Outside their hospital room window, protesters had begun gathering for the third consecutive day, holding signs demanding justice for Emma and reform of police canine programs. Television news trucks lined the street, and reporters ambushed anyone entering or leaving the hospital. The Martinez family had unwittingly become the focal point of a national debate about police accountability, and their decision would determine whether Emma's suffering would spark meaningful change or disappear behind a curtain of legal confidentiality. The clock on the wall ticked toward the deadline, each second bringing them closer to a choice that would define not only Emma's future, but their integrity as parents and their role in a fight for justice that extended far beyond their own families. Tragedy. The Martinez family's decision came at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday, after Carlos had spent the entire day walking the hospital corridors, wrestling with his conscience, while Isabella held vigil beside Emma's bed. They chose justice over financial security, signing David Chun's contingency agreement with hands that trembled not from fear, but from the weight of their moral conviction. Within hours, their choice would transform from a private family decision into a catalyst that would ignite a national conversation about police accountability and the price of institutional silence. Chun wasted no time in launching his media strategy. By 6 a.m. Friday morning, he had leaked the security footage to 3 major news networks simultaneously, ensuring maximum impact and preventing any single outlet from burying the story. The 47-second clip that had been quietly circulating among Denver police supervisors was about to explode across every television screen, smartphone, and computer monitor in America. The footage was devastating in its clarity and simplicity. Unlike so many police misconduct cases that relied on shaky cell phone videos or contested witness accounts, Mrs. Henderson's high-definition security camera had captured every horrifying detail with the precision of a crime scene photographer. The timestamp in the corner marked each second of Emma's innocence being shattered. 10 hours, 47 minutes, and 23 seconds. Emma reaching for a bubble near the fence, completely unaware of the approaching danger. 10 hours, 47 minutes, and 31 seconds. Rex breaking free from his collar with explosive force. 10 hours, 47 minutes, and 35 seconds. The collision that sent Emma's tiny body flying backward. 10 hours, 47 minutes, and 38 seconds. Rex's jaws clamping down with predatory precision. 10 hours, 47 minutes, and 52 seconds. grandmother Rose's desperate attempt to pull her granddaughter to safety. CNN aired the footage first during their 7 a.m. newscast, with anchor Sarah Mitchell providing a content warning that proved woefully inadequate for the emotional impact that followed. The video played in slow motion, allowing viewers to see Rex's dilated pupils, his aggressive body posture, and most damning of all, Officer Harrison's delayed reaction that suggested either negligence or complete surprise at his partner's behavior. 30 minutes. The video had been shared over 50,000 times on social media platforms. By noon, it had gone viral with over 2 million views across Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. The hashtag Justice for Emma began trending nationally, and the story jumped from local Denver news to the front page of major newspapers across the country. The public reaction was immediate and visceral. Parent groups organized spontaneous protests outside police stations in dozens of cities. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People issued a statement calling for federal oversight of police K-9 programs, noting that Emma's case highlighted broader patterns of excessive force in communities of color. Even typically pro-police commentators struggled to defend the footage, with Fox News anchor Jake Thompson stating during his evening broadcast, "I've supported law enforcement my entire career, but watching that little girl get mauled by a police dog that was clearly out of control, there's no excuse for that." The emotional impact was perhaps most powerfully captured by former police dog trainer Michelle Roberts, who agreed to appear on CNN's primetime news program after seeing the security footage. Roberts had been struggling with guilt since Emma's attack, knowing that her warnings about Rex had been ignored, and the viral video gave her the courage to break her silence publicly. "I resigned from the Denver Police Department because I couldn't sleep at night, knowing that dog was still on the streets," Roberts said, tears streaming down her weathered face as host Anderson Cooper pressed her for details. "I filed 3 separate reports documenting Rex's dangerous behavior. I told Sergeant Bradley that Rex was going to hurt someone. I specifically mentioned children as being at risk because Rex had shown predatory behavior toward kids during training exercises." Roberts' interview was a bombshell that exploded across social media within hours. She revealed that she had secretly recorded one of Rex's violent training episodes on her personal phone, showing the German Shepherd attacking a practice dummy with such ferocity that other trainers had to physically intervene to stop him. The footage, which Roberts had kept as insurance against potential retaliation, showed Rex completely ignoring verbal commands and requiring 3 officers to subdue him, using catch poles typically reserved for feral animals. "When I showed this video to Sergeant Bradley, he told me I was being overly dramatic and that Rex just had a strong drive to succeed," Roberts continued, her voice breaking. "He made it clear that my concerns weren't welcome, and that questioning the K-9 program could impact my career advancement. I should have gone higher up the chain of command. I should have gone to the media. That little girl is suffering because I was a coward." The most damaging revelation came when Roberts disclosed that Rex had been secretly medicated with trazodone for months to manage his anxiety and aggression. "They were drugging that dog to keep him functional," she explained. Trazodone can cause confusion and unpredictable behavior in some animals, but they were more concerned about losing their investment than public safety. Rex cost the department $15,000 to train. They weren't going to write that off just because a few trainers raised concerns. The interview generated its own viral moment when Cooper asked Roberts directly if she believed the attack on Emma could have been prevented. Roberts stared directly into the camera, her eyes red with tears, but her voice steady with conviction. "That attack wasn't an accident. It was inevitable. We created a monster and then ignored every warning sign until an innocent child paid the price for our negligence." The Denver Police Department's initial response only made the crisis worse. Chief Hayes held a press conference. attempting to discredit Roberts as a disgruntled former employee and defending Rex's service record as exemplary. However, Hayes was clearly unprepared for the media firestorm and made several statements that would later be used against him in court, including his claim that isolated incidents shouldn't be used to judge the entire K-9 program. The press conference became a public relations disaster when veteran police reporter Janet Morrison confronted Hayes with specific details from Roberts' allegations. "Chief Hayes, are you denying that Rex was being medicated with anti-anxiety drugs? Are you denying that multiple trainers raised concerns about his aggressive behavior? Are you saying that Michelle Roberts fabricated 3 separate incident reports?" Hayes' fumbling responses and obvious discomfort under questioning only reinforced the perception that the department had something to hide. His repeated assertions that he couldn't comment on personnel matters and ongoing investigations sounded like bureaucratic stonewalling to viewers who had just watched a 3-year-old girl get mauled by a police dog. The story gained additional momentum when veterinary behaviorist Dr. Jennifer Walsh decided to release her confidential evaluation of Rex that had been buried by Sergeant Bradley. Dr. Walsh appeared on multiple news programs, explaining in clinical terms why Rex should never have been deployed as a police dog and detailing the specific warnings she had provided to the department 6 months before Emma's attack. "My report was unambiguous," Dr. Walsh explained during an appearance on NBC's Today Show. "Rex exhibited classic signs of inadequate socialization, anxiety-driven aggression, and poor impulse control. I recommended his immediate retirement from active duty. I was assured that my recommendations would be implemented, but obviously they were ignored." The combination of the security footage, Roberts' revelations, and Dr. Walsh's professional evaluation created a perfect storm of evidence that made the Denver Police Department's position increasingly untenable. Legal experts appearing on news programs began predicting that the Martinez family's lawsuit would result in one of the largest police misconduct settlements in Colorado history. Perhaps most importantly, Emma's story had transcended the typical news cycle that often forgets victims once the initial shock fades. The image of the 3-year-old girl in her hospital bed, her small arm wrapped in bandages while she slept clutching a stuffed elephant, had become a symbol of institutional failure and the human cost of choosing bureaucratic convenience over public safety. The viral video had accomplished what years of policy papers and reform advocates could not. It had forced America to confront the uncomfortable reality that police dogs, like their human counterparts, could become weapons of excessive force when proper oversight and accountability were abandoned in favor of protecting institutional reputation and budgets. The Martinez family's decision to pursue justice had unleashed forces that would ultimately reshape police K-9 programs across the nation. But first, they would have to survive the legal battle that was about to consume their lives. The federal courthouse in downtown Denver had never seen anything quite like the media circus that descended upon it on the morning of October 15th, 6 months after Emma Martinez's life was forever changed by Rex's attack. Television trucks lined 19th Street for 3 blocks in each direction, their satellite dishes reaching toward the gray autumn sky like mechanical flowers seeking signal instead of sunlight. Behind police barricades, protesters held vigil with signs reading "Justice for Emma" and "Police dogs need accountability too," while counter-protesters from police support groups carried banners declaring, "Support our K-9 heroes, and don't punish all dogs for one incident." Judge Patricia Williams, a no-nonsense federal magistrate with 23 years on the bench, had requested additional security after receiving dozens of threatening letters from both sides of the increasingly polarized debate. The courtroom itself had been reconfigured to accommodate the unprecedented media interest, with a designated press section that was filled to capacity despite the strict credentialing process that had limited access to only the most established. News organizations. David Chun, representing the Martinez family, had assembled a legal team that read like a who's who of civil rights litigation. His co-counsel, Rebecca Martinez, no relation to Emma's family despite the shared surname, was a rising star in police misconduct law who had won 3 major excessive force cases in the past 2 years. Their strategy was elegantly simple: demonstrate that the Denver Police Department's systematic negligence in managing Rex had violated Emma's constitutional rights under the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable seizure. The defense team, led by Sarah Mitchell from the prestigious Denver firm of Holbrook, Stevens and Associates, faced an uphill battle defending the indefensible. Mitchell was known for her ability to humanize police officers and frame controversial incidents as split-second decisions made under impossible circumstances. Her challenge in this case was unprecedented. How do you defend a police dog that was clearly out of control in a department that had ignored every possible warning sign? Mitchell's opening strategy became clear during jury selection as she methodically eliminated potential jurors who owned pets or had young children, instead favoring older, more conservative panelists who might view the case through the lens of law enforcement necessity rather than child safety. She also targeted jurors with military or law enforcement backgrounds who would understand the concept of acceptable casualties in the line of duty. Chun countered by seeking parents, grandparents, and anyone who worked with children professionally. He wanted jurors who would see Emma not as a statistic or an unfortunate accident, but as their own daughter or granddaughter whose childhood innocence had been shattered by institutional negligence. The voir dire process stretched over 3 days, with both sides fighting over every potential juror as if the fate of American policing hung in the balance, which, in many ways, it did. The selected jury of 7 women and 5 men represented a cross-section of Denver's demographics, but their faces revealed the emotional weight they already carried. Several jurors had admitted during questioning that they had seen the security footage online, and Judge Williams had spent considerable time instructing them to base their verdict only on evidence presented in court, not on media coverage or public opinion. Mitchell's opening statement was a masterpiece of legal theater designed to reframe the entire narrative. She began not with Rex or Emma, but with Officer Harrison, portraying him as a dedicated public servant whose trusted partner had suffered an unprecedented psychological breakdown that no one could have predicted or prevented. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Mitchell said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never lost a case she truly believed in. What happened to Emma Martinez was a tragedy. No one disputes that. But tragedies are not always the result of negligence or misconduct. Sometimes, despite everyone's best efforts and intentions, bad things happen to good people. Mitchell painted Rex as a decorated police dog with an exemplary service record who had helped solve dozens of drug cases and participated in community outreach programs that had brought joy to thousands of children over his career. She presented photographs of Rex interacting peacefully with school groups, his tail wagging as young students petted his head and asked questions about police work. The contrast with the security footage was jarring and clearly intentional. Rex was not a monster, Mitchell continued, her voice rising with conviction. He was a working animal who suffered what can only be described as a psychological breakdown, brought on by the stresses of his demanding job. No one, not Officer Harrison, not Sergeant Bradley, not the veterinary experts, could have predicted that this decorated police dog would suddenly become violent without warning or provocation. Mitchell's defense strategy became even clearer as she called her first witness, Dr. Robert Hayes, a nationally recognized expert in police dog training and behavior. Dr. Hayes testified that police dogs, like human officers, sometimes experience what he termed critical incident stress that can manifest in unpredictable ways. He cited statistics showing that less than 0.3% of police dog deployments resulted in unintended civilian injuries, emphasizing that Rex's attack on Emma was a statistical anomaly rather than evidence of systemic problems. In my 30 years of training police dogs, Dr. Hayes testified, I have never seen an animal with Rex's training record exhibit such sudden, unprovoked aggression. This appears to be an isolated incident of acute stress reaction that could not have been predicted based on Rex's previous behavior and performance evaluations. Chun's cross-examination was brutal and methodical. Armed with the suppressed incident reports that Maria Santos had uncovered, he systematically dismantled Dr. Hayes' claims about Rex's exemplary record. Each question was designed to reveal another layer of the cover-up that had allowed a dangerous animal to remain in service despite repeated warnings. Dr. Hayes, were you aware that Rex had attacked a postal worker 6 months before Emma's incident? Chun asked, his voice deceptively casual. I was not provided with that information, Dr. Hayes replied, his confident demeanor beginning to crack. Were you aware that Rex had shown food aggression that resulted in injury to another police dog? Chun continued. No, I was not. Were you aware that Rex had been prescribed anti-anxiety medication for several months prior to the attack? Dr. Hayes' face flushed red. That information was not included in the records I reviewed. Chun spent the next hour methodically revealing each piece of suppressed evidence, watching as Dr. Hayes' credibility crumbled under the weight of information he should have been provided as an expert witness. By the time Chun finished his cross-examination, the jury understood that Dr. Hayes had been fed sanitized records, designed to support the department's narrative rather than reveal the truth about Rex's behavioral problems. The prosecution's case gained momentum when Chun called Michelle Roberts to the stand. The former police dog trainer had lost 30 pounds since her television interviews, the stress of going public with her warnings taking a visible toll on her health. But her testimony was devastating in its detail and emotional impact. I warned them, Roberts said, her voice barely above a whisper as she clutched a tissue in her trembling hands. I told Sergeant Bradley that Rex was dangerous. I documented 3 separate incidents where Rex showed inappropriate aggression. I specifically mentioned that children were at risk because Rex had displayed predatory behavior during school demonstrations. Roberts described in clinical detail the training incident she had secretly recorded, where Rex had attacked a practice dummy with such violence that other trainers had to physically restrain him. She explained how Sergeant Bradley had dismissed her concerns as overly cautious and made it clear that continued complaints could impact her career advancement. The emotional climax of Roberts' testimony came when Chun asked her to watch the security footage of Emma's attack, which was being shown to the jury for the first time in open court. As the 47-second clip played on the courtroom's large monitors, Roberts broke down completely, her shoulders shaking with sobs as she watched the inevitable result of warnings that had been ignored. That little girl is suffering because I wasn't brave enough to keep fighting, Roberts whispered through her tears. I should have gone over Bradley's head. I should have gone to the media. I should have done something more than just file reports that I knew would be buried. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of Roberts crying and the quiet sniffles of several jurors, who were clearly moved by her testimony. Even Judge Williams, known for her stern courtroom demeanor, appeared visibly affected by the witnesses. Emotional breakdown. Mitchell's cross-examination of Roberts was brief and respectful, recognizing that attacking the grieving trainer would only generate sympathy for the prosecution's case. Instead, she focused on Roberts' lack of formal credentials in animal psychology and the subjective nature of her behavioral assessments. But the damage was done. Roberts' testimony had transformed the case from a debate about unpredictable animal behavior into a story about institutional failure and the human cost of choosing career advancement over public safety. The jury had seen the face of someone whose warnings could have prevented Emma's suffering, and they understood that her guilt was shared by everyone in the department's chain of command, who had chosen silence over action. As the first week of trial concluded, it was clear that Chun had successfully established the foundation for his case. The Denver Police Department had knowingly deployed a dangerous weapon while ignoring every possible warning sign. The only question remaining was whether the jury would hold them accountable for the inevitable consequences of their negligence. The tension in Judge Williams' courtroom was suffocating as the third week of trial began on a cold November morning. Every seat was occupied, with reporters, legal observers, police officers, and child advocacy groups creating an audience that understood they were about to witness something unprecedented in American jurisprudence. For the first time in Colorado legal history, a 3-year-old victim would testify in a federal civil rights case against a police department, and everyone present knew that the next hour would determine not just the Martinez family's future, but the accountability standards for law enforcement across the nation. Emma Martinez had turned 4 years old just 2 weeks earlier, celebrating her birthday in the pediatric rehabilitation unit at Denver Children's Hospital, where she was undergoing intensive physical therapy. The birthday party had been a bittersweet affair. Emma could finally move her injured arm, enough to blow out the candles on her cake. But the scarred tissue and limited mobility served as constant reminders of the trauma that had stolen her childhood innocence. Her parents had agonized for months about whether to allow their daughter to testify, consulting with child psychologists, trauma specialists, and legal experts who offered conflicting advice about the potential psychological impact. Dr. Lisa Park, Emma's child psychologist, had spent countless hours preparing the little girl for this moment through play, therapy sessions designed to help her understand the courtroom environment without re-traumatizing her. Using dolls, toy courtrooms, and gentle role-playing exercises, Dr. Park had helped Emma practice talking about the scary dog day in clinical terms that wouldn't overwhelm her developing emotional coping mechanisms. The courtroom underwent a dramatic transformation to accommodate Emma's testimony. Judge Williams had ordered the removal of all cameras and recording equipment, declaring that Emma's privacy took precedence over media access. The witness stand was adjusted with a booster seat and a small table where Emma could keep her comfort. Items a stuffed elephant named Rosita that had never left her side since the attack, and a drawing she had made during art therapy showing herself, her parents, and her grandmother surrounded by protective rainbows. Defense attorney Sarah Mitchell had fought vigorously against allowing Emma to testify, arguing that a 4-year-old child lacked the cognitive development necessary to provide reliable testimony about complex events. In a closed hearing the previous week, Mitchell had presented expert testimony from developmental psychologists who explained that young children often confuse fantasy with reality, are highly susceptible to suggestion, and may alter their memories to please authority figures. Your Honor, Mitchell had argued, allowing a traumatized preschooler to testify in a case of this magnitude sets a dangerous precedent that could fundamentally undermine the reliability of our justice system. Emma Martinez is not competent to distinguish between what actually happened and what she has been told happened by well-meaning adults who have their own agenda in this litigation. David Chun countered with his own expert witnesses, including Dr. Amanda Foster, a specialist in child trauma testimony who had helped develop protocols for interviewing young victims in abuse cases. Dr. Foster testified that Emma had demonstrated remarkable clarity and consistency in describing the attack during multiple evaluation sessions, showing none of the typical signs of coached testimony or false memory construction. Emma's account has remained consistent across dozens of interviews over the past 7 months, Dr. Foster explained to Judge Williams. Her descriptions include sensory details, the smell of the bubble solution, the feeling of grass on her back, the sound of her grandmother's voice, that are consistent with genuine traumatic memory rather than constructed narrative. She has the cognitive capacity to distinguish between the dog that hurt her and other dogs she has encountered, which demonstrates the kind of specific recall that courts rely upon in victim testimony. More importantly, Chun argued, Emma's testimony wasn't about complex legal theories or factual disputes. It was about her direct experience as the victim of the attack. The jury has heard from experts, trainers, and police officers about what they think happened, Chun told the court. They deserve to hear from the person who actually suffered the consequences of the defendant's negligence. Judge Williams had spent an entire weekend reviewing legal precedents and consulting with colleagues before ruling that Emma could testify, but only under strict conditions. The questioning would be limited to 30 minutes maximum, conducted in language appropriate for a preschooler, and focused solely on Emma's direct observations rather than her interpretations or feelings about the incident. As Emma entered the courtroom, walking slowly between her parents while clutching Dr. Park's hand, the emotional impact was immediate and overwhelming. She wore a yellow dress with tiny butterflies, the same pattern as the dress that had been torn and bloodied during the attack, and her dark hair was pulled back with the bright pink ribbons she had favored since she was old enough to express preferences. The surgical scars on her right arm were clearly visible, thin white lines that traced the path of Rex's teeth and the surgeon's efforts to repair the damage. The courtroom fell silent as Emma approached the witness stand, her small footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Several jurors wiped away tears as they watched the tiny girl climb into the oversized chair, her legs dangling like a child sitting at the grown-ups' table during a family dinner. Even the court reporter, a veteran of thousands of proceedings, paused to collect herself as Emma arranged her stuffed elephant on the small table beside her. Judge Williams' voice was unusually gentle as she administered a simplified oath designed for young children. Emma, do you promise to tell me the truth about what happened to you? She asked, leaning forward with grandmotherly concern. Emma nodded solemnly, her brown eyes wide with the seriousness of the moment. Yes, she said in her small, clear voice. That somehow carried to every corner of the silent courtroom. David Chun approached the witness stand slowly, his usual courtroom confidence replaced by the careful demeanor of someone who understood he was handling something infinitely precious and fragile. He had practiced this questioning for weeks, consulting with child development experts to ensure that every word was appropriate for Emma's cognitive level while still eliciting the testimony necessary to prove his case. Emma, do you remember the day you were playing with bubbles at Grandma Rose's house? Chun asked, his voice as gentle as a bedtime story. Emma's face brightened slightly at the mention of her beloved grandmother. Yes, I was catching bubbles. They were pretty colors. Can you tell us about the dog that came to Grandma's yard that day? The change in Emma's demeanor was immediate and heartbreaking. Her small shoulders tensed, and she instinctively reached for her stuffed elephant, pulling it closer to her chest. The courtroom held its collective breath as they watched a 4-year-old girl mentally return to the most terrifying moment of her young life. The big dog was scary, Emma said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. He was mad. How? Do you know the dog was mad? Chun asked carefully, aware that this question would determine whether Emma's testimony would be seen as reliable observation or childish interpretation. Emma touched the scars on her arm with her opposite hand, a gesture that spoke volumes about how the trauma had become part of her physical self-awareness. He hurt Emma, she said, referring to herself in the third person the way many young children do when discussing traumatic events. He bit Emma's arm. It hurt really bad. The emotional impact on the courtroom was devastating. 3 male jurors were openly crying, and even hardened police officers in the gallery found themselves struggling with the reality of what their colleagues' negligence had cost this innocent child. Defense attorney Mitchell sat motionless at her table, Recognizing that any objection to Emma's testimony would appear heartless and potentially backfire with the jury, Chun continued his questioning with surgical precision, eliciting details that established Emma's credibility while avoiding anything that might re-traumatize her. Emma described the sound of the dog's breathing, the feeling of falling backward onto the grass, and her grandmother's voice calling her name. Each detail was consistent with the security footage and witness accounts, demonstrating that Emma's memories were genuine rather than constructed. Chun continued his questioning with surgical precision, eliciting details that established Emma's credibility while avoiding anything that might re-traumatize her. Emma described the sound of the dog's breathing, the feeling of falling backward onto the grass, and her grandmother's voice calling her name. Each detail was consistent with the security footage and witness accounts, demonstrating that Emma's memories were genuine rather than constructed. The most powerful moment came when Chun asked Emma if she understood why she was in the courtroom. Emma looked around at all the serious adult faces staring at her, then focused on the jury with the innocent directness that only children possess. "To tell about the scared dog," she said simply. "So no more little kids get hurt?" Those 12 words encapsulated everything that the Martinez family's lawsuit represented, not revenge or financial gain, but the hope that Emma's suffering could prevent other children from experiencing similar trauma. The jury understood that they were not just deciding a legal case, but determining whether a 4-year-old girl's pain would serve a purpose in reforming the systems that had failed to protect her. As Chun concluded his questioning and thanked Emma for her bravery, the little girl looked directly at Officer Harrison for the first time since entering the courtroom. Harrison, who had been struggling with guilt and grief throughout the trial, met her gaze and felt something break inside his chest. Emma's next words would haunt him for the rest of his life, but they would also provide the clarity that the jury needed to render their verdict. The silence in Judge Williams' courtroom was so complete that the hum of the ventilation system seemed as loud as a freight train. Emma Martinez sat in the oversized witness chair, her small legs dangling as she clutched her stuffed elephant Rosita to her chest, her brown eyes moving slowly across the faces of the 12 jurors who held her family's future in their hands. Defense attorney Sarah Mitchell had waived her right to cross-examine, recognizing that questioning a traumatized 4-year-old would be both cruel and strategically disastrous. David Chun approached Emma one final time, his voice barely above a whisper as he asked the question that would define the entire case. "Emma, sweetie, can you tell us what you want people to remember about what happened to you?" The little girl looked down at her scarred arm, then up at her parents sitting in the front row, their faces etched with months of sleepless nights and medical appointments. She turned toward Officer Jake Harrison, who sat at the defense table with tears streaming down his weathered face, his shoulders shaking with the weight of guilt that had consumed him since that terrible morning in June. "Doggy was scared," Emma said, her small voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. Those 3 simple words hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt. Emma, in her innocent wisdom, had identified what all the expert testimony, incident reports, and professional evaluations had struggled to articulate. Rex wasn't evil or malicious. He was a traumatized animal whose fear had been weaponized by human negligence. Her childlike empathy had found compassion, even for the creature that had nearly destroyed her childhood. But Emma wasn't finished. She looked directly at Harrison, whose face was buried in his hands, and added 2 more words that would resonate far beyond the walls of that federal courthouse. "Doggy, sorry." The emotional dam burst completely. Harrison's composure, which he had maintained throughout weeks of testimony about his partner's violence, finally shattered. His sobs echoed through the courtroom as he realized that this innocent child, whose life he had failed to protect, was offering forgiveness that he didn't deserve and couldn't accept for himself. Juror number 7, a grandmother of 3, later described that moment as the most profound thing I've ever witnessed in my 72 years of life. The entire jury box was in tears, and even Judge Williams had to pause the proceedings to compose herself. Emma's words had stripped away all the legal complexity and bureaucratic excuses to reveal the simple truth at the heart of the case. Everyone involved, from Rex to Harrison to the department supervisors, were victims of a system that had prioritized politics over protection. The jury deliberation lasted only 3 hours and 27 minutes, remarkably brief for a federal civil rights case of such complexity. Foreman Michael Torres, a retired teacher and father of 4, later explained their reasoning. Once we heard Emma's testimony, everything else fell into place. This wasn't about punishing good people for bad luck. It was about holding institutions accountable when they ignore obvious warning signs that put children at risk. The verdict was unanimous on all counts. The Denver Police Department was liable for violating Emma's constitutional rights through deliberate indifference to the known dangers posed by Rex. The jury awarded the Martinez family $4.2 million in damages, $1.8 million for Emma's past and future medical expenses, $2 million for pain and suffering, and $400,000 for her parents' emotional distress. More importantly, the jury's findings established legal precedent that police departments could be held liable for the actions of K-9 units when they ignored professional warnings about dangerous animals. The monetary award, while substantial, paled in comparison to the systemic changes that Emma's case would trigger across the nation. Within 6 months, the U.S. Department of Justice had issued comprehensive guidelines for police K-9 programs, requiring mandatory psychological evaluations for all working dogs, civilian oversight boards for K-9 incidents, and whistleblower protections for trainers and veterinarians who reported safety concerns. The Emma Martinez Police Dog Safety Act, passed by the Colorado legislature 8 months after the verdict, became a model for similar laws in 37 other states. The legislation required transparent reporting of all K-9 incidents, mandatory retirement protocols for dogs showing signs of psychological distress, and criminal liability for supervisors who suppressed safety warnings. Rex himself became an unexpected symbol of redemption and healing. After his removal from active duty, he was transported to the Rocky Mountain Animal Sanctuary outside Colorado Springs, where veterinary behaviorist Dr. Jennifer Walsh volunteered to oversee his rehabilitation. Away from the high-stress environment of police work, Rex gradually regained his stability under a carefully structured program of medication, behavioral therapy, and gentle socialization with specially trained handlers. Rex was never a monster. Dr. Walsh explained to a documentary crew filming his recovery 18 months after Emma's attack. He was a victim of human failure, inadequately socialized as a puppy, pushed into service despite psychological warning signs, and medicated to mask symptoms rather than address underlying trauma. In a controlled environment with proper care, he's shown remarkable improvement. The most poignant moment in Rex's rehabilitation came when Emma, now 5 years old, and having overcome her fear of dogs through extensive therapy, visited the sanctuary with her parents. The meeting, carefully orchestrated by child psychologists and animal behaviorists, lasted only 10 minutes, but the image of Emma gently petting Rex's head while he lay calmly at her feet became an iconic symbol of forgiveness and healing that graced magazine covers and newspaper editorials across the country. "I forgive Doggy," Emma told the cameras that day, her words carrying the moral authority that only innocent children possess. "He was scared like me, but we're both better now." Officer Jake Harrison never returned to active duty. He submitted his resignation 3 days after the jury verdict, unable to continue in a profession where his judgment had nearly cost a child her life. He spent the following year in intensive therapy, struggling with PTSD and survivor guilt that manifested in panic attacks whenever he heard children laughing or dogs barking. Harrison's path to redemption began when he reached out to David Shunn, asking if he could contribute to Emma's medical fund. That gesture evolved into something much larger. Harrison became a national advocate for police canine reform, traveling to police academies across the country to share Emma's story and educate future officers about the warning signs of canine psychological distress. "I failed Emma Martinez in the worst possible way," Harrison would tell rooms full of police recruits, his voice steady but his eyes haunted by memories. "I was so focused on following protocol that I ignored what my partner was trying to tell me, that he was in crisis and needed help. That little girl paid the price for my blindness, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure other officers don't repeat my mistakes." Sergeant Tom Bradley, whose cover-up of Rex's behavioral problems had enabled the attack, faced federal charges for falsifying official documents and obstruction of justice. He pleaded guilty and received 2 years in federal prison, becoming the first police supervisor in Colorado history to face criminal consequences for suppressing canine safety reports. His conviction sent shockwaves through law enforcement leadership nationwide, establishing that willful ignorance of public safety risks could result in personal criminal liability. Emma Martinez, now a confident kindergartner despite the physical limitations in her right arm, had adapted to her injuries with the resilience that children possess. She had learned to write with her left hand, developed impressive one-handed coloring techniques, and showed no signs of the psychological trauma that experts had feared would plague her development. Her greatest joy came from the weekly visits to local elementary schools, where she helped teach younger children about dog safety and the importance of speaking up when adults make mistakes. Emma's voice changed everything. Her mother Isabella reflected 2 years after the trial. "Not just for our family, but for every child in America who deserves to feel safe around police animals." She turned her trauma into a gift that will protect generations of children she'll never meet. The Martinez family used a portion of their settlement to establish the Emma Martinez Foundation for Child Safety, which provides grants for playground safety improvements, funds research into childhood trauma recovery, and advocates for child-friendly court procedures in cases involving young victims. Emma, despite her age, had insisted on being involved in the foundation's work, drawing pictures for their fundraising materials and helping her parents choose which projects to support. The case's impact extended far beyond policy changes and legal precedents. Emma's testimony had demonstrated the power of authentic truth-telling in an era of political spin and institutional denial. Her simple words, "Doggy was scared, doggy sorry," had cut through months of expert testimony and legal maneuvering to reveal the human heart of the justice system. As Emma approaches her 6th birthday, she occasionally asks her parents about the scared doggy and whether he's feeling better now. When they show her recent photos of Rex living peacefully at the sanctuary, her face lights up with the pure joy that only children can feel when they see suffering transformed into healing. Emma Martinez's 2 words had indeed changed everything, not through anger or vengeance, but through the transformative power of a child's capacity for understanding and forgiveness, proving that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most profound truths about justice, healing, and the possibility of redemption, even in the darkest circumstances.